Thank you very much. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm so glad Tim said what he said, because I was going to say that at the beginning as well. Essentially, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict provokes very, very strong opinions. And I suppose of all the issues facing the world, few will stimulate quite such a level of intensity in public debate as this one. So I'm going to ask you tonight to try for a moment to cast aside your pre-held opinions, whatever they may be, pro-Israeli, pro-Palestinian, pro-neither, pro-both, and just try for a moment to put that aside, because I'm going to try and argue this motion as well as I can in a non-political way, partly because there are no Palestinians on the panel, partly because I'm not an Israeli and the other three people on the panel are. I'm just a Brit with the temerity to have a view. And also because my job in conflict resolution requires me not to take sides, but just to try and be pragmatic and to try and identify the genuine obstacles to peaceful progress. I'm going to argue tonight that Israel's settlement policy is deeply destructive to its own future for a number of reasons. First, by pursuing its policy of settling what is now over 500,000 Israeli citizens in the West Bank on land deemed by the international community to belong to the Palestinians, Israel is making the world, and even its own allies, believe that it has no genuine interest in making peace with the Palestinians. Secondly, as a result of this settlement policy, Israel's support in the international community is weakening, and it's leading to the expression delegitimization of Israel and isolation of Israel, and I fear ultimately onto a path of its own destruction. Finally, I'm going to argue that even if Israel wanted to redress the situation at a future date as part of a peace agreement, the larger the number of settlements built and settlers settled beyond the so-called 1967 borders, the harder it will be for any Israeli government to persuade its citizens to withdraw from them. But let's start at the beginning with some maps. I always find it helpful to look at maps as a way of illustrating what's been going on. I'm sorry, it's hard for you to see up there and turn your back. But the map on the left-hand side, the first map, represents Palestine as it was under the British Mandate, which covers the whole of what is now the modern Israel and the occupied territories. The second map is what the UN proposed as the partition plan lines that would form the Israeli and the proposed Arab state, or Jewish and Arab state as they called them in those days. And the white bit it was proposed for the state of Israel, and the yellow bit, or brown, whichever you like to call it, was proposed to be the Arab state. The third map gives you an idea of what actually happened after the British withdrew and after the 1948 War of Independence. And the one before would have given Israel, I think, about 55% of the land, and the Arabs about 45%. After the 1948 War of Independence, that gave roughly 78% of the land to the Israelis and 22% to the Palestinians. The Palestinians in the West Bank, you can see on the right-hand side of the two yellow bits, the left-hand side is the Gaza Strip. And the idea would be, in the event of an Arab state, that you'd have some kind of road or railway or something that would connect the two so that Palestinians could get from one part of the territory to the other. And the final map on the right-hand side is roughly where we are today, in terms of the yellow bits are where the Palestinians live, and the white bits are where the Israelis live. This is a map of the West Bank, and the West Bank is where the settlements we're talking about tonight are. You can see Jerusalem sort of quite low down on the map. So to the left of these yellow bits is the state of is Israel, and the rest of what you're seeing is the West Bank. The brown bits on the West Bank are where Israelis have control, and the blue bits are the settlements. The brown lines are the roads which connect them all up, and the white sort of white is a sort of strange colour, but sort of creamy colour, are the bits where the Palestinians live. And as you can see, because of these roads and so forth, they're sort of broken up into lots of little areas where they live. This is another way of showing you the map. It's what some people describe as an archipelago or a succession of little bits which don't create the possibility or the easy possibility of what some people would describe as a contiguous Palestinian state. Just as importantly, if I go back a map, you can see that the whole brown bit on the right is what connects up to the border with Jordan, with the River Jordan, and that is all under Israeli control. So if that bit remains so, and the Palestinians didn't have that, the Palestinians wouldn't have an independent border. So that gives you, I think, an idea of where we are today, how people live today. Now, over the last 25 years or so, there's been a peace process in progress, as you know, led by successive United States administrations. The process has been attempting to secure a peace agreement between Israeli and Palestinian leaders, leading to a creation of a Palestinian state. And that Palestinian state, as I said, would be the Gaza Strip and that whole West Bank area. But during the period of the peace process, successive Israeli governments have settled about 550 to 600,000, Danny will tell us the exact amount, Israeli citizens on Palestinian land. That's in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Land that the international community have traditionally accepted as the basis for a future Palestinian state. This is what begs the serious questions. If the state of Israel is genuinely pursuing peace, why is it intent on settling its citizens on land that it would have to return? Why is it spending tens of millions of dollars every year on building projects of housing and infrastructure, roads and so forth, that would be unrecoverable? Cynics would say that this is because Israel is not interested in making peace. It has no genuine intention of creating a Palestinian state, but instead intends to take over the whole of the West Bank, creating an Israel from the River Jordan all the way over to the Mediterranean Sea. Given the nature of public debate in the current election campaign in Israel, this is not entirely far-fetched. There are plenty of members of the governing coalition who've publicly stated their opposition to a Palestinian state, let alone one that would be based, as the international community desires, on the pre-1967 borders. Leading Israeli politicians have in the last week advocated even the annexation of large tracts of the West Bank to secure them as permanent Israeli territory once and for all. And this may well, in fact, end up being a policy of the next Israeli government. So settlement building is continuing apace, not just within the existing settlements. New outposts are being established every year in the West Bank, and despite international criticism, even from Israel's closest ally, the United States, the process continues, often funded by donations from the United States, supported by tax breaks for US citizens who make these kinds of donations. So, given the rate of this settlement development, it's hard to find any international political figure who genuinely believes in the Israeli government's intent to seek peace with the Palestinians based on the 1967 borders, maybe with some land swaps, with a capital in East Jerusalem. And the rhetoric of the current Israeli election campaign, combined with these maps, tell a story, and I think you'd have to be a peculiarly credulous individual to believe a different story. Which brings me to my second point, Israel's waning support in the international community. In November, Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian president, apparently frustrated with the lack of any progress with the peace process, because, as he puts it, of Israel's continued settlement policies, went to the General Assembly of the United Nations in order to try and secure observer status for a Palestinian state. Now, in the vote, some 138 countries of the world voted in favor, 41 abstained, and only 8 countries of the 187 in the voting process, apart from Israel, voted against. These countries were the Marshall Islands, Palau, Nauru, and Micronesia, 4 tiny island states in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, Panama, the Czech Republic, Canada, and the United States. This is what is left of the international support for the State of Israel when it really needs it. It's hard to think of a more isolated country in the world apart from Iran and North Korea. And for Israel to be able to rely neither on the support of the UK, France, or Germany, or even the Netherlands on this issue, is a rather dismal sign. So when Netanyahu announced the building of further settlements as a punishment for the Palestinians going to the UN for observer status, condemnation instantly appeared from none other than the US, Canadian, and Czech diplomats who felt that their support in the UN vote had been betrayed. So where does this leave Israel? Well, if it continues its settlement policies and refuses to accept the international parameters of the peaceful two-state solution, then I believe the process of Israel's delegitimization, moral, political, legal, the thing it fears the most, will continue to develop apace. What are the alternatives? Well, there's a plausible alternative to a two-state solution, and it's a one-state solution where everyone, Jews and Palestinians, live together and are equal citizens in the same country. But this leads to the Jews being in a minority, an outcome unlikely to be plausible to Jewish Israelis and advocates of a Jewish state. Some Israelis are now advocating a one-state solution, but they would rather like to leave Gaza behind so they can ensure the Jewish majority, which is not likely to appeal to the outside world or obviously the Palestinians. So if it's not a two-state solution or a one-state solution, what do we call what's left? The current status quo. If Israel does not allow any prospect of statehood, freedom, genuine self-governance for the Palestinians, and with Israeli citizens having markedly different rights and standards of living to their Palestinian counterparts, and with Israel running out of friends on the international stage, the situation, I'm afraid, will inevitably lead to accusations from some countries in the world that this situation is one of apartheid. And that means that those countries will call for Israel's increasing isolation. In time, it will mean no more World Cups, no more Olympics. And my final point should be just as worrying for Israel. There are now so many settlers in East Jerusalem and the West Bank that even if an Israeli government wanted to make peace and withdraw hundreds of thousands of settlers back to Israel, it looks almost impossible to do. Every year, more and more settlers are becoming army officers, policemen, judges, politicians, the very people who will, if the time comes, have to supervise, orchestrate, and legitimize the withdrawal of settlers from their home and their lands. The more settlers there are, the harder it will be to do. And it'll be harder for an Israeli government to be elected who advocates a withdrawal. Turkeys do not vote for Christmas, as they say in Britain. So that's my conclusion. It looks straightforward. I think it's pretty obvious when you look at the maps that the two-state solution is disappearing. The one-state solution is hardly going to be popular in Israel, and the support for Israel is going downwards, not upwards. I think in the long term this leads, tragically, that Israel is heading towards its own destruction, and that's why I support this motion. Thank you very much.